Imagine this, it's a blazing summer afternoon. The sun beats down relentlessly, and you're miles away from civilization. Your car, a luxurious SUV that's always been a source of pride, now sits idle on the side of a deserted road. The unmistakable sound of a flat tire has brought your journey to an abrupt halt. You step out, your finely pressed suit sticking to your back from the heat, and realize there is no cell signal. Frustration bubbles up as you glance at your watch, knowing a crucial meeting awaits you, a meeting you'll likely miss. It's just you, the sweltering sun, and the creeping weight of helplessness. As you stand there, unsure of what to do, a figure emerges in the distance. At first, it's just a blur against the shimmering heat waves. Slowly, the shape becomes clearer, a young boy, maybe 14 or 15, walking toward you with steady strides. His clothes are faded, his sneakers worn, and a dusty backpack hangs from one shoulder. There's something about the determination in his steps that catches your attention. You can't help but wonder, who is this kid? Why is he out here, in the middle of nowhere? When he reaches you, he glances at the car, then back at you, and asks with surprising confidence, "Got a flat tire?" You nod, a little taken aback by his composure. "Yeah, I do." And no signal to call for help either, you reply, your voice tinged with frustration. The boy doesn't seem fazed. Instead, he smiles and says, "I can help. My grandpa taught me how to change tires. Got a spare in the back?" What would you do in this situation? Would you hesitate, unsure if you should trust a stranger? Or would you accept the help of this unlikely savior? It's a moment that challenges everything you thought you knew about the world, and about yourself. Our story today begins with Robert, a retired businessman who's always relied on his wealth and connections to navigate life. But on this particular day, all of that seems meaningless as he's stranded on a dusty Kentucky road. And then there's Tyler, a teenager whose quiet confidence and selflessness turn what could have been a minor inconvenience into a life-changing encounter. So, what happens next? Does Tyler ask for money in return for his help? Or does he simply walk away after lending a hand? More importantly, how does Robert react to this unexpected act of kindness? We want to hear from you. What would you do in Robert's shoes? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you're curious to see how this story unfolds, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who could use a reminder about the power of kindness. Because sometimes, the smallest gestures can make the biggest impact. Let's dive in and discover what happens when two very different worlds collide on a quiet country road. Robert watched as Tyler knelt down beside the flat tire, his movements calm and deliberate. It wasn't what Robert had expected. After all, Tyler was just a teenager, his thin frame dressed in a worn t-shirt and scuffed sneakers. But there was a quiet confidence in the way he examined the damage, running his hand along the edge of the shredded rubber before looking up. "You've got a good spare, right?" Tyler asked, his tone matter-of-fact, as though this was something he did every day. Robert nodded, gesturing toward the back of the SUV. He still wasn't sure how this boy planned to fix the problem, but at this point, he didn't have many options. Tyler opened the trunk, his hands moving efficiently as he pulled out the jack and tools. "My grandpa showed me how to do this last summer," he said, as if sensing Robert's hesitation. "It's not hard once you've done it a couple of times." Robert stood nearby, feeling oddly out of place. He was used to being in control, the one who gave orders and handled situations. But now, watching this teenager take charge with such ease, he felt a twinge of both gratitude and embarrassment. The sun beat down as Tyler worked, his brow glistening with sweat. He slipped the jack under the SUV, cranked it up with practiced precision, and loosened the lug nuts one by one. Robert found himself impressed despite his earlier doubts. "You've done this a lot, haven't you?" he asked, trying to fill the silence. Tyler looked up briefly, a small smile on his face. "A few times. Grandpa says it's important to know how to help yourself and others." Within minutes, the spare tire was securely in place. Tyler tightened the bolts, double-checking his work before stepping back. All set, he said simply, brushing his hands off on his jeans. Robert pulled out his wallet, flipping through bills until he found a generous sum. Here, he said, holding out the money. You've earned this. I really appreciate your help. But Tyler shook his head, raising his hand in polite refusal. Thank you, sir, but I don't need that, he said. My grandpa taught me we should help people whenever we can. You needed help, so I helped. That's enough for me. For a moment, Robert didn't know what to say. He stood there, money still in hand, as Tyler picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. Take care, mister, Tyler said with a quick wave before heading back down the road. As Robert watched him disappear into the distance, he felt a mix of gratitude and amazement. Who was this boy, and how had he come to embody such rare and selfless values? The encounter left Robert standing by his car, not just with a fixed tire, but with a lingering sense of something far more profound. That evening, Robert sat in his spacious living room, surrounded by the trappings of success. The soft hum of classical music played in the background, a glass of fine whiskey sat untouched on the mahogany table, and the glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows on the pristine white walls. Yet, for all the comfort and luxury that his life afforded him, Robert couldn't shake the image of Tyler from his mind. The boy's genuine smile, his calm demeanor, and the way he had walked away without expecting anything in return felt like a quiet challenge to everything Robert had built his life around. He leaned back in his leather chair, closing his eyes for a moment as memories began to surface. Flashbacks of boardrooms, negotiations, and triumphs in business played like a reel in his mind. Robert had spent decades climbing the ladder, ensuring his every move was calculated for success. But in all those moments of victory, there were also memories he had tried to bury, moments where he had turned away from someone in need, dismissing them as distractions to his goals. A young intern seeking mentorship, a neighbor struggling to fix their car, an old friend asking for support during a difficult time, each instance now loomed large in his thoughts. He had always told himself it wasn't his responsibility, he was too busy, too important, too focused. But Tyler had shattered that narrative with a single act of kindness. The boy had nothing to gain, no ulterior motive, yet he had offered help without hesitation. Robert felt a pang of guilt, realizing how often he had relied on money to solve problems instead of offering genuine care or effort. The simplicity of Tyler's generosity was humbling, and it stirred something deep within him, a sense of inspiration he hadn't felt in years. Robert stood and walked over to the large window overlooking his meticulously landscaped yard. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but they felt distant, almost irrelevant. What did all of this mean if he had become so disconnected from the values that had once mattered? For the first time in a long time, Robert felt small, not in a demeaning way, but in a way that made him realize the vastness of the world beyond his bubble. He turned away from the window and picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts before setting it down again. No, this wasn't a task for someone else to handle. He needed to see Tyler again, to thank him properly. More importantly, he needed to understand the kind of values and upbringing that had shaped someone so remarkable. Determined, Robert began planning his trip back to the rural road where their paths had crossed. This wasn't just about gratitude anymore, it was about reclaiming something he had lost along the way, the ability to connect, to care, to give without expecting anything in return. The next morning, Robert was already behind the wheel before the sun had fully risen. The quiet hum of the engine filled the car as he drove back toward the rural stretch of road where he had met Tyler. The world outside his window seemed different now, the rolling hills and small houses carrying a kind of beauty he hadn't noticed before. He couldn't explain why, but this journey felt important, a chance to do something meaningful, to give back in a way he hadn't allowed himself in years. As he reached the outskirts of the town, Robert began stopping at small diners and gas stations, asking anyone who would listen about a teenage boy who might match Tyler's description. A kid, maybe 14 or 15, skinny, dark hair, real polite, he'd say, showing a faint smile as he added, "Help me change a tire out near the old highway." Most people shook their heads, offering little more than a shrug or a polite "sorry, can't help you." Hours passed, and Robert's frustration began to grow. But just as he was considering giving up, a kind older man behind the counter of a corner store finally offered some direction. "You're probably talking about Tyler. His mom and him live just outside town, down by the creek road. Little white house with blue shutters. Can't miss it." Robert thanked him, feeling a wave of relief wash over him as he climbed back into the SUV. The directions were spot on. Robert soon found himself pulling into the dirt driveway of a small, weathered house. The siding was worn, the porch sagged slightly, and the yard was dotted with a few old toys and a clothesline swaying gently in the breeze. He stepped out of the car, his polished shoes crunching against the gravel, and approached the front door with a mixture of nerves and determination. The door opened before he could knock, and a woman, clearly Tyler's mother, looked at him with cautious curiosity. She appeared tired but kind, her eyes sharp as she studied this stranger in a tailored suit standing on her porch. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I'm looking for Tyler," Robert said, offering a small, genuine smile. "He helped me yesterday when I was stranded. I wanted to thank him properly." Her expression softened, and she nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the home was modest but warm. The furniture was old but clean, and the walls were adorned with family photos and hand-drawn pictures. As Tyler appeared from the back room, a wide smile spread across his face. "Hey, mister. You found us," he said, his voice filled with surprise and delight. Robert couldn't help but smile back, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for this moment. In the days that followed, Robert found himself returning to Tyler's home, each visit bringing him closer to understanding this remarkable family. He saw the sagging roof, the leaky faucets, and the faded paint on the walls, but more than that, he saw the warmth and love that filled the space. It didn't take long for him to decide that he wanted to help, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration and gratitude. With Tyler's mom's hesitant approval, Robert arranged for contractors to assess the house and start on much-needed repairs. The roof was the first priority, followed by fixing the plumbing and giving the walls a fresh coat of paint. Robert also took the time to talk with Tyler, learning about his interests and dreams. When Tyler mentioned his fascination with how things worked and his dream of becoming an engineer, Robert's mind began to turn. Soon, he had ordered a set of tools and engineering kits to spark Tyler's curiosity even further. As the repairs progressed, word of Robert's kindness began to spread through the small community. Neighbors who had known Tyler and his mom for years started to pitch in. A retired carpenter offered his skills to build a new porch, while another neighbor donated flower pots to brighten up the yard. Someone even brought over a sturdy second-hand desk for Tyler to use for his studies. It was as though Robert's actions had ignited a spark of goodwill, and the entire neighborhood came together to ensure that this family's home truly became a sanctuary. During one of his visits, Robert stood in the yard, watching as a group of volunteers worked on the garden. Tyler ran past him, excitedly showing off a model he had built with one of the kits Robert had given him. "Look, Mr. Robert. It's a windmill. I figured out how to make it spin faster," Tyler said, his voice brimming with pride. Robert smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. "That's incredible, Tyler. I can see you're going to do great things one day," he replied, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, Tyler's mom stepped out onto the newly built porch. She looked around at the transformed home, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mr. Robert, I don't even know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You've done so much for us. This house, it's more than I ever dreamed of." Robert turned to her, his expression earnest. "You and Tyler have given me something I didn't realize I was missing," he said. "Purpose. Connection. You reminded me what life is truly about, and that's worth more than all the money in the world." As they stood together, the sound of neighbors laughing and children playing in the distance filled the air. The house was no longer just a structure, it was a symbol of hope and community. For Robert, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one built on the foundation of kindness and shared humanity. In the weeks that followed, Robert found himself spending more time in the small town than in his sprawling home back in the city. Each visit to Tyler's family brought him a renewed sense of purpose. There was something profoundly grounding about the simple conversations on the newly built porch, the shared meals at a modest table, and the laughter of neighbors as they worked together to improve each other's lives. For the first time in years, Robert felt part of something real and meaningful. His wealth, which once seemed like a fortress that separated him from others, now became a bridge to connect with those who needed it most. As Robert's bond with Tyler and his family grew, so did his involvement in the community. He began volunteering at the local community center, offering to mentor underprivileged youth who reminded him of Tyler, bright, resourceful, and full of untapped potential. He helped organize events to raise funds for school supplies and sponsored programs to teach kids practical skills like carpentry and mechanics. It wasn't just about giving money, it was about being present, sharing his experiences, and showing these young people that they mattered. Meanwhile, Tyler thrived in his newfound opportunities. With the tools and encouragement Robert had provided, he spent hours tinkering with engineering kits, creating small inventions that amazed everyone around him. His eyes would light up as he explained his projects, each one more ambitious than the last. One day, he told Robert, "I'm going to design things that help people, just like you helped us." Hearing those words made Robert's chest tighten with pride. Tyler wasn't just dreaming of a better future, he was actively working toward it. One quiet evening, after the day's work was done and the community center had emptied out, Robert and Tyler sat together on the steps of the porch. The stars above sparkled in the clear night sky, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets. Tyler broke the comfortable silence, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Mr. Robert, you didn't just fix our house," he said, looking up at the older man. "You fixed my faith in people. I didn't think anyone like you cared about someone like us." Robert was struck by the boy's honesty. He reached out, resting a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Tyler, you and your family reminded me of what truly matters," he said softly. "You've shown me that it's never too late to make a difference. And if I've helped restore your faith in people, it's only because you restored mine first." In that moment, their connection deepened into something unshakable. It wasn't just about the kindness exchanged between them, it was about the shared understanding that even the smallest gestures can have the most profound impact. For Robert, this was no longer just a chapter in his life. It was the beginning of a legacy, one built not on wealth or success, but on compassion and purpose. The warm hum of chatter and laughter filled the air as the town gathered under the twinkling string lights hung across the community park. Long tables were lined with homemade dishes, and children raced around with sparklers, their laughter echoing into the evening sky. The celebration was more than just a party, it was a testament to the power of community and kindness. Tyler's family stood near the front, their smiles wide as they greeted neighbors who had come to see the transformation they had all contributed to. And at the center of it all was Robert, feeling both humbled and deeply connected to the moment. When the time came, Tyler's mom stepped forward to quiet the crowd, her voice carrying a tone of heartfelt gratitude. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the changes to our home, but the way this town came together to show us that we are not alone," she said. "But there's one man we owe a special thanks to. Mr. Robert, could you join us?" Robert hesitated for a moment, not because he was nervous, but because the weight of the moment felt significant. As he walked up to the makeshift stage, the crowd clapped and cheered. He looked out at their faces, each one filled with warmth and hope. Clearing his throat, he began to speak. "Thank you, everyone," he started, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I came here a stranger, stranded on the side of the road, frustrated by what felt like an inconvenience. But then I met Tyler. And in one small act of kindness, he showed me a side of life I'd long forgotten." He paused, his eyes meeting Tyler's in the crowd. Kindness doesn't stop with one person. It spreads, grows, and transforms lives. Tyler's selflessness inspired me to look beyond myself, and together, we've all created something bigger than any one of us could have done alone. The crowd was silent, hanging on his every word. Robert continued, "What we've built here is more than a house. It's hope. It's connection. It's proof that even in a world that often feels divided, there are still places where people come together to lift each other up. And that gives me hope for all of us." As he stepped down, the applause was thunderous. Robert returned to his seat next to Tyler and his family, feeling a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. Tyler leaned over, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mr. Robert, I've been thinking," he said. "What if we could build a community center? A place where kids like me can learn, where families can get help, and where neighbors can meet and share ideas." Robert smiled, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Tyler. And you can count on me to help make it happen." As the evening wore on, the event felt less like a conclusion and more like a beginning. The dream of a community center became the topic of every conversation, and neighbors eagerly offered their skills and support. For Robert, it was a moment of clarity. He had come here seeking to repay a small act of kindness, but he was leaving with a renewed sense of purpose and a vision for the future. The night ended with Tyler and Robert standing together, looking out at the glowing lights of the town and the smiling faces of the people who had become like family. It was more than just a celebration, it was a promise of what was to come. And as Robert watched Tyler talk animatedly about his plans for the future, he knew without a doubt that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. As the night drew to a close, the story of Tyler and Robert remained on everyone's minds. What began as a simple act of kindness, a teenager helping a stranded man, had grown into something far greater. Tyler's willingness to lend a hand without expecting anything in return didn't just fix a flat tire, it sparked a chain of events that transformed lives. It inspired Robert to rediscover his sense of purpose, brought a community closer together, and planted the seeds for future generations to thrive. This story reminds us that even the smallest gestures can have a ripple effect. Kindness doesn't stop at one act. It travels, grows, and touches the lives of countless others in ways we may never fully understand. Tyler's generosity rekindled hope, not just for Robert but for an entire town, proving that one person's actions truly can make a difference. So, what would you do in Robert's place? Would you simply say thank you and move on, or would you find a way to pay it forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you'd keep the spirit of kindness alive. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Together, we can spread these messages of hope and make the world a better place, one small act at a time.